So my work concerns the possibility of distinguishing topologically projective and projective manifolds, projective complex manifolds, and general compact Kähler manifolds. So I should first describe what they are. So I start with a complex projective, so I say varieties, I should say manifolds. So you have a complex projective space, which is a very nice complex manifold, homogeneous, and you consider those closed submanifolds which are complex, namely locally defined by holomorphic equations. So these, by definition, these are the complex projective manifolds. But in fact, this apparent generality is illusory because there is a very classical theorem due to Cho, which says that these complex submanifolds are in fact algebraic, so can be defined globally by a polynomial homogeneous polynomial equation. So, and this important theorem has been later on completely generalized by Serre under the name of Gaga principle, saying that when you have something which is globally defined and holomorphic on a projective variety, it's in fact algebraic. So this is I say this because it's in fact very important for Hodge theory. For example, this principle also tells you that if you have a complex projective manifold, you can compute its cohomology with complex coefficients, which is something which really comes from topology, just using the corresponding algebraic variety. So it's very deep. So now let me go to Kähler manifold. So the characterization is by these are compact complex manifolds, and the characterization is via the existence of a spatial matrix. So the complex manifold has a local holomorphic coordinates, which makes it like Cn, n is the complex dimension. And so the tangent space, so by this local identification, you see that the tangent space has an induced complex structure. So a complex structure on the tangent space of a manifold is called an almost complex structure. So it makes sense of looking at Hermitian metrics for this. That is a Hermitian metric on the tangent space equipped with this complex structure. And in local holomorphic coordinates, such an Hermitian metric will be written as a sigma of Hij dzi dZg bar, where the Hij is a matrix of Hermitian matrix of infinite functions, which is positive at any point. And the definition of a Kähler metric is that so associated to this H, you see that there is a canonically defined two form, which is written here, which is in fact a real two form, so it's I/2 sigma of Hij dzi wedge dZg bar. So this is a real two form, and the definition of a Kähler metric is that these two forms should be closed. And so the definition is maybe not very enlightening. There are others which are more useful geometrically, but it's a definition that I use. And so the Kähler class, which will play a very important role in this talk, will be denoted. So this form is closed, so it has, of course, a cohomology class in the space in the cohomology with the real coefficients H2 of XR, which have a closed two forms modulo exact two forms, and this class will be denoted by omega between brackets. And the relation between both geometries, that a complex projective manifold is Kähler, because simply because the projective space itself is Kähler. So it's standard ways of constructing Kähler metrics by taking the churned forms of the Hopf associated to metrics on the Hopf line bundle. And so by restriction from the complex projective space, one sees that a projective manifold, a complex projective manifold is also a Kähler. So now I want to go to a very crucial point, which says that in compact Kähler geometry, the complex geometry and the topology fit very well. And so I explain more precisely what this means. So suppose that you have any complex manifold, so for complex dimension n, so that means that you have a local holomorphic coordinate, and you can define the notion of a differential form of type PQ. So the degree is K, which it is equal to P plus Q. And by definition, so I am looking at complex differential forms. And the definition is simply that it should be written as locally as a combination of monomials, dzi wedge dz bar, so it's the multi-index notation, where the cardinality of I is P and cardinality of G is Q. Okay, and here, of course, the coefficient should be, for the infinite complex functions. And so having this notion, you can define a subspace of the cohomology with complex coefficients, HP plus Q of X C. So this space is computed as a closed complex P plus Q forms, modulo exact ones. And so inside you can define HPQ of X as being the set of cohomology classes, which can be represented by a closed form of type PQ. And this definition, of course, can be done on any complex manifold, but it is not very useful in general because simply because there are too few. If you don't have the Kähler assumption, there are too few closed, too few classes of type PQ for any PQ. The reason is that. So, of course, any form, any complex K form can be written as a sum, uniquely as a sum of forms of type PQ. But when you look at the exterior differential, this decomposition is not at all preserved by the exterior differential. So, if you have omega of type PQ, then d omega is the sum of two terms. Namely one of type P plus 1 Q and the other of type P Q plus 1. And so d omega equal to 0, it's in fact 2 in the equation. This is too much. And so there are examples, for example, the Hopf surface, where you have, for example, cohomology in degree 1, so closed form, which are not exact, but there are no forms of type 1, 0 or forms of type 0, 1 in this sense. No, I mean, no non-zero. And so, and now the very special feature of Kähler geometry is the fact that we have the Hodge decomposition theorem, which says that in this case, each complex cohomology space decomposes into the direct sum of its HPQ subspaces. So that says that there are enough classes of a given type to generate the whole cohomology. So one can say, if one wants, that it's a way of reflecting the complex structure on the cohomology, in the sense that, of course, the complex structure on X, you can see it on the decomposition of the space of forms into forms of type PQ. And by the Hodge decomposition theorem, you see this decomposition on cohomology. And now a very important fact in this decomposition is the so-called Hodge symmetry phenomenon, which tells the following. So the complex conjugation acts on this space HP plus Q of XC, because it's just because it's HP plus Q of R X with R coefficient, tensor C. And now the Hodge symmetry says that if you take the complex conjugate of HPQ, you get HQP. And that's a consequence of the fact that the complex conjugate of a closed form of type PQ is a closed form of type QP, and then this definition. Okay, so it's not exactly I will only come back to this later, but so this decomposition, of course, depends very much on the complex structure, and it is interesting precisely because of this. But already we can extract from this a very classical topological restriction on compact Kähler manifolds, namely the Betti numbers of odd degree, so the dimension of cohomology spaces in odd degree should be even, and this is because in the Hodge decomposition, if the degree is odd, of course no HPQ can be equal to its own conjugate, so the spaces come by pairs of spaces of the same dimension. So later on, if I have time enough, I will see that there are many supplementary topological restrictions on compact Kähler manifolds, which come from the fact that this Hodge decomposition is in fact compatible in a certain sense with the cup product on the cohomology algebra. Now, this leads to this decomposition theorem leads to the notion of Hodge structure of weight L. So you look at complex cohomology. So complex cohomology is the most interesting thing. It's the most central thing. As I told, if you are in algebraic geometry, you can compute it only using the Zariski topology and the coherent sheets and so. But on the other hand, because your X is also a topological object, you can compute the complex homology by using the Schiff theory, in particular, so homology with coefficients, with value in the constant sheaves. And so you have the complex homology contains integral cohomology, and in fact it is defined over Z, so it has it has this integral piece inside it, and on the other hand it comes equipped with this decomposition into complex subspaces which satisfies the Hodge symmetry. And the two sets of data combined together leads exactly the notion of Hodge structure of weight L. So I give an example which is very classical, but also very misleading, because it may give the feeling that Hodge structure is a very geometric object. So the example is the case of weight 1. In this case, I say that a Hodge structure of weight 1 is the same thing as a complex torus. So when I say the same thing, I could be more pedantic and say that there is an equivalence of categories between category of weight 1 Hodge structures and category of complex tori. So that goes the following way. So if you have a Hodge structure of weight 1, so that means that you have a lattice which will be of even rank by this remark, and you should have a decomposition of this of the corresponding complexified vector space into the sum of one subspace which I call L10 and its conjugate. And to this you associate simply the following object. So you consider the LC, so L tensor C, and you quotient both by L10, this complex subspace of half the dimension, and also by L. And it turns out that maybe you should be better look at this as LC over L10, namely this is a complex vector space, mod the L, which is lattice. And it turns out that these conditions that both are complementary implies that the L, so it's exactly equivalent to the fact that the L project to a lattice in the quotient LC over L10. So that's why you have this correspondence. Okay. So now I come back to the relation between projective geometry and Kähler geometry. So I already mentioned that a projective complex manifold is in particular Kähler, and the Kodaira embedding theorem it gives a perfect characterization of projective complex manifolds inside a compact Kähler manifold. It says the following: so if you have a compact Kähler manifold X, it is projective if and only if it admits a Kähler metric, so a Kähler form whose cohomology, whose Kähler class omega is a rational cohomology class. So it belongs. So I told that the Kähler class is a real cohomology class in general, but now you want that the Kähler class is in H2 of XQ. So in one direction, so namely in this, that the condition is necessary, it's completely obvious because the projective space itself satisfies this condition. This is the other direction, which is very, very beautiful and very, very hard. Well, so the easy direction shows that there are many compact Kähler manifolds which are non-projective. Namely, for example, if you consider a general complex torus, it's easy to see that it won't have a Kähler class which is rational. That comes from the fact that the Kähler classes belong to, so they are of type 1,1, I already mentioned this, and so in fact they belong to a proper subspace H11 of H2 of XR, and when you change, when you move deform the complex structure in a generic way, this space H11 won't contain any non-zero rational cohomology class. On the other hand, precisely on this example, you can use the Kodaira embedding theorem in the other way by saying, when I move very much, when I move in a generic way the complex structure, the space H11 moves a lot, and so I can arrange so that by a small deformation, I catch a Kähler class, which is also rational. Of course, this uses the fact that rational cohomology classes are dense inside the real space of real cohomology classes. Okay. Maybe I should mention a direct. So the rest of my talk, or part of the rest of my talk, will be devoted to try to extract from the Kodaira embedding theorem some topological restriction. There is one case where you can say that if X is a Kähler compact, then it has to be projective. For example, so first of all, if H20 is 0, then it has to be projective, and the reason is the fact that then the whole cohomology is of type 1,1. And so in that case, the set of Kähler classes is open in H2 of XR, and being open, it contains rational cohomology classes. And for example, one easy way to impose H20 equal to 0 is to ask that the B2 number is none greater than 2, because for some easy reason, this implies that H20 is equal to 0. Okay. So, well, so I explained that so there are compact Kähler manifolds which are not projective, but it's natural to expect that by deforming, if you look at the Kodaira criterion, you can hope that by a small deformation, you can deform it on a complex projective manifold. So maybe let me try to be more precise here. If you look at the set of Kähler classes, so as I told, the Kähler form is a real form of type 1,1, which is closed and which satisfies a certain positivity condition that associated Hermitian form is a positive definite. So it follows that in fact the Kähler cone is open because this positivity condition is open inside the space H11 of XR, which by definition is a set of cohomology classes which can be represented by a closed form, real closed form of type 1,1. So what you can hope is, so now let me denote by XT, so that's the same differentiable manifold with a deformed complex structure. It turns out that if you make a small deformation of the complex structure, the complex structure remains scalar, and furthermore, this space H11 of XT inside the constant space H2 of XR deforms in a smooth way with parameters. And furthermore, I know that this is open. So what you can hope is that by deforming also, that this space deforms enough so as to fill in an open set of this H2 of XR, and so that you catch for a small deformation of the parameter T, one rational class, which also in the deformed Kähler cone. So this situation is exactly the one that I described for complex tori, and it turns out that it's also true for surfaces. So this was proved by Kodaira. He tells us that if you have any compact Kähler surface, then there is an arbitrarily small deformation of the complex structure, which is projective, so which satisfies the Kodaira embedding criterion. So the proof of Kodaira is not, it's not interesting in itself because it's a consequence of his complete classification of surfaces. So it's not enlightening. But there has been a recent proof by Bourdal, which works exactly in this spirit, namely, basically he shows that either you can deform you start from a Kähler surface, either you can deform enough the complex structure in order to catch a rational cohomology class in the in the deformed Kähler cone, or the original surface is already projective. So, for example, there are projective surfaces which are rigid, so you cannot deform the complex structure. But what he says is that, for example, if a Kähler surface is rigid, it is already projective. So that's what a consequence of his work. So, the Kodaira problem is simply the question whether a similar statement holds in a higher dimension. So you can formulate it in the strongest form, namely, suppose that you have a compact Kähler manifold. Can you deform the complex structure to a projective one, namely one which can be embedded in a projective space? Here you can look at a small deformation or a large deformation, according to what you are interested in. But you can look at also at a much weaker question. So, for example, keeping the same differentiable manifold, you can ask whether there exists any complex structure, maybe not in the same deformation class, which is a projective. and the last much weaker question is when you simply forget about even the differentiable manifold, you just keep the underlying topological manifold, or you just keep the homotopy tape, and you ask, given any compact Kähler manifold, does it have the homotopy tape of a complex projective manifold? Of course, the various questions are weaker and weaker. So what's the problem? Of course, the Kodaira embedding theorem. So maybe I put the criterion here. You see, it's very nice, but the criterion, it involves rational cohomology, which is the topological, but it also heavily depends on the complex structure. And so it's not clear how to extract from this any topological restriction. So you would like to extract from this a condition which is independent of the complex structure. But so finally I answered negatively all these questions, and in particular the topological version. And so I proved the following. So I proved that starting from dimension 4, there exist compact Kähler manifolds which do not have something which is even weaker than the homotopy tape, namely the cohomology algebra, the rational cohomology algebra of a complex projective manifold. So I mentioned because the study of the pi1 of Kähler manifold is very important. So and there are many known restrictions on them. I mentioned that in dimension at least 6. There are simply, I could also construct simply connected such examples. So I will explain I will describe the first examples I constructed. They are extremely simple from the point of view of complex geometry. Namely, they look like complex tori in which you blow up points and complex subtori. So there is, from the point of view of complex geometry, they are not really interesting. And also some people, I mean, precisely Nicolas Bourdal, Frédéric Campanin, and Yao asked me whether so maybe this first result suggested that in higher dimension some kind of meromorphic version of the Kodaira statement should hold because these examples were bimeromorphic to complex tori, and I explained that a complex torus deforms to a projective manifold. So they asked that maybe if you start from a compact Kähler manifold, there is always a bimeromorphic model which deforms to a projective complex manifold. But this I also disproved later on. So I proved that starting, so I need a higher dimension. There exist also compact Kähler manifolds for which no bimeromorphic model has the rational cohomology algebra of a complex projective manifold. So this is the main result. What I want to do first is to describe the simplest example. So, as I told, there are variants. The simplest examples are not simply connected, but if you work a little more, you can get simply connected examples. And the construction in the bimeromorphic case is more sophisticated, but the ideas are essentially the same. So the first example is as follows. So I will consider complex tori with endomorphism. So to construct a complex torus with endomorphism, so I like to rank the complex torus in the same way as before. So I start from a lattice L. I consider the complexified vector space LC. And then I have a certain subspace L10, and I write my complex torus as this quotient. So obviously the L here is identifies naturally to the first homology group of the torus. So if I have an endomorphism of my complex torus, certainly there is an induced endomorphism of the lattice, which is simply phi t lower star, the action of phi t on homology. Now conversely, suppose that you have an endomorphism of the lattice. What is needed for it to come from an endomorphism of the complex torus? Then, so what you do is, so you have your endomorphism, you complexify it, that gives an endomorphism of LC. But in order for this phi c, say, to descend and to give an endomorphism of T, you need that L10 is stable under your complexified endomorphism. So the only condition is that it's to start from an endomorphism of the lattice and to choose a subspace L10 which is stable under the complexified endomorphism. Okay, so if you are able to do this, you have a complex torus with endomorphism. So, I will consider endomorphism which have only a distinct so eigenvalues with multiplicity 1. So, and in fact, which have no real eigenvalues. And in that case, it's clear that so there are only finitely many eigenspecies, and so there are finitely many possible complex tori having this endomorphism. So now, having this, I can consider the complex torus T cross T, and it contains 4 copies of T, namely T cross 0, 0 cross T, the diagonal of T, and the graph of the endomorphism. And they are all there are 4 complex submanifolds, all isomorphic to T. Because my phi has no real eigenvalue, it's easy to see that these complex subtori meet transversally, meet pairwise transversally in finitely many points. So I can blow up all these pairwise intersection points, and the proper transforms of the tori Ti are smooth. So inside after I blew up the point, and then I blow again these proper transforms. Now it's a general fact that if you have a compact Kähler manifold and you blow up a complex submanifold, you still have a compact Kähler manifold. So the X that I get is a compact Kähler manifold, and the theorem that is the example which corresponds to the first example which gives this theorem is that so suppose that the dimension of T is at least 2, so that is a complex dimension. That means that the lattice has a rank at least 4. Suppose that the dimension is at least 2. And the endomorphism phi is generic, so I explain what I mean by this. Then the compact Kähler manifold, which I get here, which I constructed here, does not have the cohomology algebra of a complex projective manifold. So this is exactly the particular case of this theorem. So what means generic here? The genericity is in the sense of Galois theory. My endomorphism phi has 2n eigenvalues, so assume that the dimension of T is n. And the genericity assumption, I could make it weaker, but let's say, let me consider this assumption, is that the Galois group of Q bar over Q acts as a symmetric group in 2n letters over the 2n eigenvalues. That's the strongest assumption. In fact, for this statement, I could weaken it, but for the other examples, I need stronger and stronger assumptions on the Galois group. So I would like to explain some key ingredients for the proof. So for the proof of this, of this particular example, after that I will try to extract from it a kind of general statement or general criterion. How this works? So the starting point is an extremely simple observation, which is the fact that if you look at the Hodge decomposition of on the cohomology, on the complex cohomology of a compact Kähler manifold, then it is compatible with the cup product on the cohomology algebra, in the sense that if I take the cup product of a class of type PQ and a class of type P prime Q prime, it is of type P plus P prime Q plus Q prime. And that's obvious because I remind that a class of type PQ is a class which can be represented by a closed form of type PQ. And now this corresponds to the fact that the wedge product of a closed form of type PQ and a closed form of type P prime Q prime is a closed form of type P plus P prime Q plus Q prime. Okay. So, well, now the other point in such examples is the fact that the cohomology algebra is very complicated. So I said that from the point of view of complex geometry, these varieties are not very interesting, but from the point of view of topology, they are interesting in the sense that if you look at the cohomology algebra, in fact, it encodes the conjugacy class of my original endomorphism phi. So that's a very important point. So the idea is that, well, if the cohomology algebra is complicated enough, this compatibility condition is very restrictive on the possible Hodge decomposition on the cohomology of X, and that means that for no Hodge decomposition on the cohomology of X, which is also compatible with the cup product, I could have a rational class of type 1,1, which is a good candidate for being a Kähler class for some maybe other complex structure. But here I have to, unfortunately, to explain what I mean by a good candidate to be a Kähler class. So I told that the set of Kähler classes in H11R is a cone. It's an open cone. We know we have a very good characterization by de Mailly and Pound, but it's not very useful here. Now the point is that Kähler classes satisfy certain properties which are, say, half topological. The first property, which is purely topological, is so-called hard Lefschetz property, which says that for any integer k none greater than n, the dimension of x, then the k product with omega to the n minus k should be an isomorphism between hk and its Poincaré dual h2n minus k. So this is the first condition which is satisfied, which is an open condition satisfied by the Kähler classes inside H11. And another very important point is the so-called Hodge-Riemann bilinear relation. So there are of two types, there are relation 2 and relation 3. This one is completely obvious. It says that, associated to this, to my class omega, I have a certain intersection pairing on H1 of X, which is defined by this formula. And it's clear that this intersection pairing should vanish on H1, 0. So these are the first relations, and they are an immediate consequence of the fact that omega is of type 1,1. But the second very important relation is a positivity condition, which says that if I look now at this Hermitian pairing on H1 of XC, that is to alpha I associate so I have this formula. In fact, it corresponds to a Hermitian intersection pairing on H1 of XC. Then the second Hodge-Riemann bilinear relation says that this intersection pairing should be positive, definite positive on the H10 part. So what we meet here is the notion of polarized Hodge structure of weight 1. So when I have a polarized Hodge structure of weight 1, if I have an intersection form which satisfies these two conditions, so an intersection form on defined over R, which satisfies these two conditions, I will say that I have a real polarized Hodge structure. But if I am able to choose, furthermore, this intersection form to be rational, that is when I want that when alpha and beta are rational, the resulting Q omega of alpha beta is rational, then I will speak of rational polarized Hodge structure. So here I put an integral, but if we can want with integral or rational coefficients, that's the same at this point. So for example, to show the importance of this notion, so I told already that there is an equivalence of categories between weight 1 Hodge structures and complex tori. Then if I look at weight 1 polarized Hodge structure, I mean with integral polarization, then they correspond exactly to abelian varieties, namely complex tori which are projective. And this is because, so I recall that if I have a Hodge structure of weight 1, I consider the corresponding complex torus here, which is written as this quotient. And if I have a polarization on my Hodge structure, which is given by an intersection form Q on L, which satisfies these two conditions, then you can see that this Q can be interpreted as an integral cohomology class on the corresponding complex torus, which is in fact a Kähler class. The Kähler condition is exactly summarized by 2 and 3 in that case. Again, it's maybe slightly misleading because we don't have at all. We don't have such interpretation for higher weight Hodge structures. So let me finally, grosso modo, show how the ingredients are combined. Basically, so I consider my X, which has been, which is here. I want to show this fact, and by what I explained, it suffices to show the following. The cohomology algebra of X is fixed; it's given. I want to show that it's not the cohomology algebra of a projective manifold, and for this it suffices to show that there is no Hodge decomposition on each Hodge decomposition of weight k on each hk, compatible with the Cup product in the sense that I wrote before, and in such a way that the Hodge structure, weight 1 Hodge structure on H1 admits an integral polarization. So, and this is proved in two ways. So, as I told, the cohomology algebra I get in this case is very complicated, it's very rich. And if I look at the compatibility condition, they will imply, in this particular case, that the Hodge structure I will put on H1 should have an homomorphism of Hodge structure. So it's easy to give a sense of an homomorphism of a Hodge structure. it turns out that in this particular case, so the analysis of the cohomology algebra shows the following. The endomorphism that I get force the Hodge structure satisfying this compatibility condition, the Hodge structure on H1 to be the sum of two copies of a certain Hodge structure, which admits itself an endomorphism, which is conjugate to my original endomorphism phi. So it's more natural to take the transpose. But then I conclude by the following fact, which is very, very easy. I am just saying that it's well known that if you look at the endomorphism of abelian varieties are very restricted, and it's well known. I am saying that I recall that the endomorphism phi was generic. I mean, so I can take it as I want. And the proposition is that if n is at least equal to 2, and if I consider a Hodge structure of a weight 1 on L, which admits phi or transpose as an endomorphism, where phi is generic in the Galois sense, then this L does not admit an integral polarization. Another way to formulate this is to say that a generic endomorphism phi on a lattice cannot act on a complex torus which is projective or an abelian variety. So that's well known because, in fact, there is a complete classification of endomorphism algebras of abelian varieties. So maybe I skip the proof of there are several proofs of fact 1. One which the first proof I gave was very geometric, and it needed integral coefficients. And then Deligne gave me a much better proof, which I used very much in my further work. But maybe I won't say something about this. So, well, so basically that's the idea of the proof, and now I will like to simply summarize what I have done in some more general way, and let me introduce the notion of a Hodge structure on a cohomology algebra, or a polarized Hodge structure on a cohomology algebra. So, let me, a cohomology algebra is consider, for example, the cohomology algebra with rational coefficients of orientable compact manifold, or more generally, consider any finite dimensional Q algebra with a graded commutative Q algebra which satisfies the Poincaré duality. That's enough. And so, what I will call a Hodge or compatible Hodge structure on such an algebra is simply the data of, so on each graded piece AK, I will put a Hodge structure of weight K, and so that is the Hodge decomposition satisfying Hodge symmetry. And I will ask, so the compatibility condition is that APQ, AP prime, Q prime is sent to AP plus P prime, Q plus Q prime. Okay, so here I have just the compatibility conditions. And now I put in the notion of a polarized Hodge structure on a cohomology algebra. I say that such a Hodge structure on a cohomology algebra admits a real polarization if for some cohomology for some class in A11R, so that means by this I mean the intersection of A11C with the A2R. If the polarization should be determined by such class alpha. First of all, satisfying the hard Lefschetz property for any k. So that is Maybe I should mention that such a cohomology algebra necessarily has a even top degree 2n, and so the hard Lefschetz property makes sense abstractly. You want that the product with alpha to the n minus k is an isomorphism between ak to a to n minus k for any k. And also I want that this alpha satisfies the Hodge-Riemann bilinear relations. And finally, I will say that the Hodge structure on the cohomology algebra has a rational polarization. If furthermore, I can take for alpha a rational cohomology class which is of type 1,1 and satisfies all these conditions. So in fact, I didn't explain what are in general the Hodge-Riemann bilinear relations. I just explained what they are in degree 1. So there were two conditions. One which was obvious, just depending on the fact that the class alpha is of type 1,1, so I don't mention. But the other, which is more important, is a positivity condition. In higher degree, the situation is more complicated because to state the Hodge-Riemann bilinear relation, I need to introduce the so-called Lefschetz decomposition, which is a consequence of the Lefschetz isomorphism in all degrees. And then the Lefschetz decomposition automatically is a decomposition into so-called real sub-Hodge structures. That is, each piece again decomposes itself into pieces of type PQ. And the Hodge-Riemann relations in higher degree says that a certain intersection form, which depends only on alpha, which is written here, has a definite sign, which so a sign that we know, which depends only on the three numbers PQR, which determines the piece of the Hodge-Lefschetz decomposition. And you want that. This Hermitian intersection pairing has this sign on each on the piece of the Hodge-Lefschetz decomposition, which is determined by the three integers PQR. So it's a little technical, but just to say with this terminology, I can explain in one sentence the criterion. The criterion I use to show the fact that my X did not have the cohomology algebra of a complex projective manifold, namely what I proved in fact is the fact that the X I had constructed has the property that its cohomology algebra does not admit a compatible Hodge structure with a rational polarization. And of course, the trick here is the fact that because it is a Kähler manifold, I can take certainly its cohomology algebra admits a Hodge structure with real polarization, simply given by a Kähler form and the Hodge decomposition. So the point is that so, as you can see, all this is completely algebraic. So to conclude, I would like to mention that this notion of cohomology algebra, of Hodge structure on a cohomology algebra, also has applications in the study of the topology of compact Kähler manifolds. So I mentioned that compact Kähler manifolds are restricted topologically, even in the class of in the more general class of compact symplectic manifolds. For example, they satisfy the property that their Betti numbers in odd degree are even. And this is known by it's a very now classical fact that these properties are not satisfied by a general symplectic compact manifold. So certain constructed examples of compact symplectic manifold with odd B1, then the MacDuff constructed simply connected examples with odd Betti numbers in odd degree. And then later further methods for constructing new examples of symplectic manifolds were found. What I would like to explain is that in fact there are many further topological restrictions. Much more than those given by this condition on the Betti numbers and parity of Betti numbers and by the Lefschetz, the hard Lefschetz property. Let me construct. What I want to exploit is the observation that if you have a compact Kähler manifold, that I already told it, its Comoldi algebra admits a Hodge structure with polarization, which is a real in general, but polarization may play a role even if it is only real. And so the problem, again, to exploit this observation is the fact that the HPQ number of the Hodge decomposition, of course, are not topological invariant. So, and neither the symplectic class or the Kähler class, they are not symplectic invariant. So we have to exploit in an abstract way the existence of such Hodge structure or polarized Hodge structure on the cohomology algebra. So let me give an example where you can extract very easily a restriction. So I consider a compact oriented manifold or orientable manifold. And I assume that its cohomology algebra is generated in degree none greater than 2. And now I consider a complex vector bundle on X. And so there is a corresponding projectivized bundle. So it's a bundle of projective spaces over X. And I will assume that this complex vector bundle has a trivial first Chern class. So it's well known by Leray-Hirsch, for example, that if you look to P upper star, it injects the cohomology algebra of X in the cohomology algebra of P of A. And what I show is that if the cohomology algebra of P of A admits a compatible Hodge structure, then in fact each P upper star HK of XC has an induced Hodge structure. So that means that the original manifold X already satisfies the condition that its cohomology algebra admits a compatible Hodge structure. But what is more, under these assumptions, if you consider the other Chern classes, Ci of A, they should be of type II for this induced Hodge structure. And so it's an easy algebraic computation, but this allows to construct very simple compact symplectic manifolds, which at first sight look very close to Kähler manifold because they are constructed as projective bundles over Kähler manifolds. So they are symplectic, they satisfy the hard Lefschetz property, but they do not have the cohomology algebra of a Kähler manifold. So I just start from a compact Kähler manifold X, And I suppose that its cohomology algebra is generated in degree none greater than 2, which is not very, very hard condition. And I choose a cohomology class, a rational cohomology class of degree 4, which has the properties that for any compatible Hodge structure on the cohomology algebra of X, the class alpha cannot be of type 2,2. So this is quite so in fact the X I constructed for the solution of the codiagram problem provides easily such an example. Then by this theorem, I see that the manifold P of E is not topologically Keller. Okay. So you see that. Of course, these manifolds are not interesting for themselves, but they are very close at first sight of being Keller, and in fact, topologically Keller, and in fact, they are not. And to conclude, I just mention one further result, which, so in this statement, I use, as you can see, there is no mention of the polarization. I just use the compatibility of the Hodge decomposition with K product. Now the notion of polarization makes things much more rigid, and I also have the following result. So that concerns the topology of topological summands of compact Keller manifold. So I consider a compact Keller manifold, and I suppose that topologically, so it is homeomorphic to a product X cross Y, and I assume, for example, that the X has B1 equal to 0. Then the result is that each X and Y, so the cohomology algebra of X and Y admit polarizable Hodge structures inducing the one of Z. So that makes sense because the cohomology algebra of Z is by a QNet decomposition the tensor product of the cohomology algebra of X and the cohomology algebra of Y. And so if I have a compatible Hodge structure on the cohomology algebra of X and on the cohomology algebra of Y, I will have, by this formula, a compatible Hodge structure on the cohomology algebra of on the tensor product of both. And so that shows that, in fact, these restrictions, which are very strong, are in fact also satisfied by the topological summands of compact Keller manifolds. So I will stop here.
Questions? Yeah.
So you said in your theorem, your last theorem that you did not discuss in the beginning, that you have examples with non-bimeromorphic proof. So is this true also for the equivalence relation generated by this? So you generate bimeromorphic and the same cohomology?
So are you telling about deforming plus bimeromorphic deformation?
Either deformation or just the same cohomology algebra property?
So what is not completely clear, the manifolds I construct tend to be rigid, but it's only a local rigidity. And you know, you may have a locally rigid manifold which are not globally rigid, so you may have a gap phenomena. So I am not sure. It might be that by a large deformation, I meet something which does not satisfy again these properties that under bimeromorphic. So you are right. There might be again a possibility that first deforming, then transforming, making bimeromorphic transformations, and then deforming again. I find a projective variety. But that is not possible under small deformation.
John?
What's the gas in dimension 3?
In fact, I don't know. In fact, very. We don't know enough about Keller, compact Keller geometry and classification. So, well. One of my students looked at the problem, and the conclusion is that if you are able to, so if you know, so it's a result that we don't know at all, that is surprising. Suppose that you have a compact Keller trifold, which has a Kodaira dimension minus infinity. So in the projective case, it's well known that it is uniruled, but it's not known in the Keller case. But essentially that's the only missing case. I think maybe I think that the statement was that can be proved by mimicking the method of Bourdal. That if you have a compact Keller trifold, which whose algebraic dimension is not zero. That means that through any point you have a closed analytic subspace of dimension, a proper closed analytic subset of dimension at least one. Okay. Then for them, they can be deformed to projective manifold. But still there are. So admitting a number of conjectures on Keller geometry in dimension 3, essentially the Kodaira result should be true in dimension 3.
One more question, Dan.
Maybe just a small question. That again, the non-bimeromorphic examples, do they have some interesting vibration structure?
In fact, these are essentially the point is that they are P1 cross P1 bundles over things which are bimeromorphic to generalize the self-product of generalized Kummer manifold. And the key point of the story is that there are P1 cross P1 bundles, but which are not, bimeromorphically trivial in the analytic, in the Zariski topology, if you like. So that is possible because we are in the Keller situation. So we may have, we may have vector bundles with no rational, no meromorphic sections, and so on. So basically, they look like this.
So let's thank the speaker again.